The Trouble with Tribbles, the first real comedy done in the original series. We talk about it after this. Hello out there, I'm the oldest nerd, and The Trouble with Tribbles almost didn't get made because the fact that the network people and the studio people thought, well, this is action-adventure, it's not comedy. And yet it pulls off the comedy while everybody pretty much stays in character. Spock has always been known to throw little barbs, which are kind of hidden jokes. McCoy is a natural for this. Kirk has a number of funny moments as well, although sometimes I think he plays it a little too stiffly, and he's trying to be the straight man on all of this, and I think he would rather be telling the jokes. But he does do a decent straight man on here, and they've got a lot of support in this episode where there are a number of character actors which we have seen elsewhere that make this show work. For instance, Stanley Adams, who played Cyrano Jones, started in like 1958 doing guest stars and voiceover stuff and who knows what else. And he was most famous as well as for this part of also being the giant carrot on that episode of Lost in Space where they have living vegetables. And there's a little side thing on that particular episode that the two of the leads in Lost in Space were banished from the set for 2 days because they couldn't quit laughing at the scene where they're having to be chased by a carrot. But I digress. So that's Stanley Adams. He was in Breakfast at Tiffany's and some pretty good films of the time. Also, Guy Raymond, who plays the traitor. He's somebody whose face looks so familiar, you know you've seen him somewhere, and you probably have. From 1950 to 1980, he was in virtually every TV series playing a commissioner, a cop, a bank teller, whatever they needed. He was one of these kind of people who just kind of worked for kind of a nebbishy looking fellow. Also, Ed Reimers played Admiral Fitzpatrick. He's only on a cameo on a screen and doesn't have any interactions with any other characters as far as we can tell. But if you grew up during the 60s as I did, he was a spokesperson for Allstate Insurance. And you're in good hands with Allstate. He had a very recognizable voice. And even when he wasn't pictured in these commercials, it was his voice. And so that was... the only time I've ever seen him in anything other than Allstate commercials was in this particular thing. And in fact, one of the blooper reels has him holding Tribbles, saying you're in good hands with Tribbles, with that same commercial type voice that he had. Also, the administrator of the space station K7 was Whit Bissell. Whit Bissell is another one of these people who has been in everything, but you might remember him as the general in the Time Tunnel. You don't recognize him here because he's much more a background character here, but he was often playing generals and admirals and things like that because he had this very official look. So that was it. Also, the part of Barris was who was the Federation specialist on the grain deal with Sherman's Planet, was played by William Shallert. And you might remember him if you ever saw the old Patty Duke show. He played one of the Patty's dads and the other Patty's uncle. And once again, character parts. He was probably also in Leave It to Beaver and various other shows during the 50s and early 60s in which he played father figures or things like that. So that was kind of interesting. He was able to do more acting than he had in most of his. Also, his assistant, Charlie Brill, who was a comedian. He used to have a comedy bit with his wife, Mitzi McCall. They were more known as a panelist on the Hollywood Squares and Tattletales than anything else, but they had acting jobs from the 50s through about 2010. He's still alive. And for a long time, when variety shows were in vogue, he was on the Ed Sullivan Show. He was on the same Ed Sullivan Show that they introduced the Beatles to the United States. So he got a very big lift in his career during that time. So with that, there are a number of things. There's a whole book. David Jarrell wrote this, and it was probably one of the most famous things that he ever wrote. And he also wrote a book called The World of Star Trek, which he talked about how much of the show was put together. And Trouble with Tribbles, probably his most notable writing that he's ever done. So I recommend that to you, and also recommend The World of Star Trek if you can find it. I don't know if it's still in print, but it gives you a whole lot of background on how the show was done if you're interested in those kind of things. So why not let me know what you think about this episode. It's a lot of people's favorites. Put it down in the comments below, and then, of course, if you have not liked and subscribed, please do so, and then join us next week when we will have, well, actually this week on Friday, we'll have the next episode of Strange New Worlds, and then we'll have more retro reviews next week. So until then, don't go far.